really even need an intro this week?
Yes, we do. They're the funnest part.
The video's only 2 hours.
Okay, here are those web statistics from the last 2 months you asked for, and networking just faxed them over. God.
What if we do
You're
it with a
still watching the Maiden's camera
No, we
footage?
can't do that.
Yes, and we have a crisis on our hands.
We do?
It's the last week of the read-along, and the Maidens have yet to post the last video. They're washing dishes like we have all the time in the world.
Maybe they're waiting for it to upload.
No, I checked. They're still arguing over what the video's intro should be. They haven't even recorded it yet. So it's terrible. Don't they know the video is due today?
They're arguing?
Yes, so what different ideas? Grace is trying to convince Catherine to just sing, and Catherine is trying to convince Grace to do something more exciting.
Like what?
Some ridiculous idea about a time travel library where all the classic book characters are talking to you while you pick out a book or something like that. How awful.
Interesting.
No, it's awful. And then Grace said that they should do another talent night. They even had some terrible jokes to perform, such as I can row a boat, canoe.
Wow, that's pretty bad.
And then, Sydney. And then, I thought they had finally agreed on something. A patient going to the therapist about a strange condition after reading the Scarlet Pimpernel. He diagnosed it as OFD, obsessive fangirling disorder. And he tells that after the last few chapters of Scarlet Pimpernel closure, and the symptoms would subside.
That would have fit really well with this week.
It's ridiculous! And put the kibosh to that idea too! Oh, that's it. We have to do something.
Like what?
We'll just have to record the opening ourselves.
What?
I'm sorry, but I've waited long enough. My listeners don't deserve this. They need to hear what happens as soon as possible.
Well, I'm sure the Maidens are aware of that.
Huh, you think so? I don't. What do they know of schedules and commitments? They don't post it regularly on Thursdays for weeks. Their subscribers, I'm sure, are terribly confused. And I can guarantee you it's affecting our reputation. Oh, this whole thing is giving me a headache. Sydney, please get me a hot drink. I need to clear my head. And then I'll just write out a simple introduction, explaining what happened.
Alright, well. Tea?
Yes, English breakfast.
Right. I'll use the ninja.
The what?
The ninja.
What in the cuckoo's name is the ninja? We don't have a ninja.
The Ninja Auto IQ tea and coffee maker that arrived yesterday.
I didn't order Ninja Auto IQ, whatever that thing is. Did you order it? I didn't order it.
No, I didn't order it.
Well, then where did it come from?
Well, Hetty brought it in yesterday. She said something about being odd. There was no tag on it or something. I guess being no sender listed anyway.
Anonymous. Where is this ninja?
Hetty put it over there on the table.
Let me see. Sydney, we've been compromised.
We interrupt this message to bring you the Maidens of Green Gables.
It is the most joyous time at Green Gables. It is coffee time, and that means that it is... Tell us what time it is, Grace.
Well, it is finally it is finally time to read the end of the book.
I shall find out what happens.
Oh, happy day. Very exciting. So I'm just going to dive right into it because I never think of what to say for these intros. Chapter 28. Chapter 28. The Père Blanchard's Hut. As in a dream, Marguerite followed on. The web was drawing more and more tightly every moment round the beloved life which had become dearer than all. To see her husband once more, to tell him how she had suffered, how much she had wronged, and how little understood him, had now become her only aim. She had abandoned all hope of saving him. She saw him gradually hemmed in on all sides, and in despair, she gazed round her into the darkness and wondered whence he would presently come to fall into the death trap which his relentless enemy had prepared for him. The distant roar of the waves now made her shudder. The occasional dismal cry of an owl or a seagull filled her with unspeakable horror. She thought of the ravenous beasts. She thought of the ravenous beasts in human shape, who lay in wait for their prey and destroyed them as mercilessly as any hungry wolf for the satisfaction of their own appetite of hate. Marguerite was not afraid of the darkness. She only feared that man on ahead who was sitting on the bottom of a rough wooden cart, nursing thoughts of vengeance, which would have made the very demons in hell chuckle with delight. Her feet were sore, her knees shook under her from sheer bodily fatigue. For days now she had lived in a wild turmoil of excitement. She had not had a quiet rest for 3 nights. Now she had walked on a slippery road for nearly 2 hours, and yet her determination never swerved for a moment. She would see her husband, tell him all, and if he was ready to forgive the crime which she had committed in her blind ignorance, she would yet have the happiness of dying by his side. She must have walked on almost in a trance, instinct alone keeping her up and guiding her in the wake of the enemy, when suddenly her ears, attuned to the slightest sound by the same blind instinct, told her that the cart had stopped and that the soldiers had halted. They had come to their destination. No doubt on their destination, no doubt on the right, somewhere close ahead was a footpath that led to the edge of the cliff and to the hut. Heedless of any risks, she crept quite close up to where Chauvelin stood, surrounded by his little troop, He had descended from the cart and was giving some orders to the men.
Who is this?
Chauvelin. Okay. These she wanted to hear. What little chance she yet had of being useful to Percy consisted in hearing absolutely every word of his enemy's plans. The spot where all the party had halted must have lain some 800 meters from the coast. The sound of the sea came only very faintly, as from a distance. Chauvelin and Degas, followed by the soldiers, had turned off sharply to the right of the road, apparently on to the footpath which led to the cliffs. The Jew had remained on the road with his cart and nag. Marguerite, with infinite caution and literally crawling on her hands and knees, had also turned off to the right. To accomplish this, she had to creep through the rough, low shrubs, trying to make as little noise as possible as she went along, tearing her face and hands against the dry twigs, intent only upon hearing without being seen or heard. Fortunately, as is usual in this part of France, the footpath was bordered by a low, rough hedge, beyond which was a dry ditch filled with coarse grass. In this Marguerite managed to find shelter. She was quite hidden from view, yet could contrive to get within 3 yards of where Chauvelin stood, giving orders to his men. "Now," he was saying in a low, peremptory whisper, "where is the Père Blanchard's hut?" "About 800 meters from here along the footpath," said the soldier who had lately been directing the party, "and halfway down the cliff." "Very good. You shall lead us. Before we begin to descend the cliff, you shall creep down to the hut as noiselessly as possible and ascertain if the traitor royalists are there. Do you understand?" "I understand, citizen." "Now, listen very attentively, all of you," continued Chauvelin impressively, and addressing the soldiers collectively, "for after this we may not be able to exchange another word, so remember every syllable I utter, as if your very lives depend on your memory. Perhaps they do," he added dryly. "Well, listen, citizen," said Degas, "and a soldier of the Republic never forgets an order. You who have crept up to the hut will try to peep inside. You who have crept up to the hut will try to peep inside. If an Englishman is there with those traitors, a man who is tall above the average, or who stoops as if he would disguise his height, then give a sharp, quick whistle as a signal to your comrades. All of you," he added, once more speaking to the soldiers collectively, "then quickly surround and rush into the hut and seize each one of the men there before they have time to draw their firearms. If any of them struggle, shoot at their legs or arms, but on no account kill the tall man. Do you understand?" "We understand, citizen." "The man who is tall above the average is probably also strong above the average. It will take 4 or 5 of you at least to overpower him." There was a little pause, then Chauvelin continued, "If the royalist traitors are still alone, which is more than likely to be the case, then warn your comrades who are lying in wait there, and all of you creep and take cover behind the rocks and boulders round the hut, and wait there, in dead silence, until the tall Englishman arrives. Then only rush the hut when he is safely within its doors. Remember that you must be as silent as the wolf is at night when he prowls around the pens. I do not wish those royalists to be on the alert. The firing of a pistol, a shriek or call on their part would be sufficient perhaps to warn a tall personage to keep clear of the cliffs and of the hut. And," he added peremptorily, "it is a tall Englishman whom it is your duty to capture tonight." "You shall be implicitly obeyed, citizen." "Then get along as noiselessly as possible, and I will follow." "What about the Jew, citizen?" asked Degas, who silently, like noiseless shadows, one by one the soldiers began to creep along the rough and narrow footpath. "Ah, yes, I had forgotten the Jew," said Chauvelin, and turning towards the Jew, he called him peremptorily. "Here, you, Aaron, Moses, Abraham, or whatever your confounded name may be. he said to the old man who had quietly stood beside his lean nag, as far away to the soldiers as possible. "Benjamin Rosenbaum, it is so it please your honor," he replied humbly. "It does not please me to hear your voice, but it does please me to give you certain orders which you will find it wise to obey you. So please your honor, hold your confounded tongue. You shall stay here, do you hear, with your horse and cart until I return. You are on no account to utter the faintest noise, the faintest sound, or even to breathe louder than you can help. Breathe louder than you can help. Nor are you, on any consideration whatsoever, to leave your post until I give you orders to do so. Do you understand?" "But your honor," protested the Jew pitiably. "There is no question of but or of any argument," said Chauvelin in a tone that made the timid old man tremble from head to foot. "If, when I return, I do not find you here, I most solemnly assure you that, wherever you may try to hide yourself, I can find you, and that punishment swift, sure, and terrible will sooner or later overtake you. Do you hear me?" "But, your excellency," I said, "do you hear me?" The soldiers had all crept away. The three men stood alone together in the dark and lonely road, with Marguerite there behind the hedge, listening to Chauvelin's orders as she would to her own death sentence. "I hear, your honor," protested the Jew again, while he tried to draw nearer to Chauvelin. "And I swear by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that I would obey your honor most absolutely, and that I would not move from this place until your honor once more designed to shed the light of your countenance upon your humble servant. But remember, your honor, I am a poor old man. My nerves are not as strong as those of a young soldier. If midnight murderers should come prowling round this lonely road, I might scream or run in my fright. And is my life to be forfeit? Is some terrible punishment to come upon my old poor head for that which I cannot help?" The Jew seemed in real distress. He was shaking from head to foot. Clearly he was not the man to be left by himself on this lonely road. The man spoke truly. He might unwittingly in sheer terror utter a shriek that might prove a warning to the wily Scarlet Pimpernel. Chauvelin reflected for a moment. "Will your horse and cart be safe alone here, do you think?" he asked roughly. "I fancy, citizen," here interposed Degas, "they will be safer without that dirty, cowardly Jew than with him. There seems no doubt that if he gets scared he will either make a bolt for it or shriek his head off. But what am I to do with the brute? Will you send him back to Calais, citizen?" "No, for we shall want him to drive back the wounded presently," said Chauvelin with grim significance. There was a pause again, Degas waiting for the decision of his chief, and the old Jew whining beside his nag. "Well, you lazy, lumbering old coward," said Chauvelin at last, "you had better shuffle along behind us. Here, citizen Degas, tie his handkerchief tightly round the fellow's mouth." Chauvelin handed a scarf to Degas, who solemnly began winding it round the Jew's mouth. Meekly, Benjamin Rosenbaum allowed himself to be gagged. He evidently preferred this uncomfortable state to that of being left alone on the dark St. Martin road. Then the three men fell in line. "Quick," said Chauvelin impatiently. "We have already wasted much valuable time." And the firm footsteps of Chauvelin and Degas, the shuffling gait of the old Jew, soon died away along the footpath. Marguerite had not lost a single one of Chauvelin's words of command. Her every nerve was strained to completely grasp the situation first, then to make a final appeal to those wits which had so often been called the sharpest in Europe, and which alone might be of service now. Certainly the situation was desperate enough, a tiny band of unsuspecting men, quietly awaiting the arrival of their rescuer, who was equally unconscious of the trap laid for them all. It seemed so horrible, this net, as if it were drawn in a circle, at dead of night, on a lonely beach, round a few defenceless men, defenceless because they were tricked and unsuspecting. Of these one was the husband she idolized, another the brother she loved. She vaguely wondered who the others were, and who were also calmly waiting for the Scarlet Pimpernel, while death lurked behind every boulder of the cliffs. For the moment she could do nothing but follow the soldiers and Chauvelin. She feared to lose her way, or that she would have rushed forward and found the wooden hut, perhaps been in time to warn the fugitives and their brave deliverer yet. For a second a thought flashed through her mind of uttering the piercing shrieks which Chauvelin seemed to dread, as a possible warning to the Scarlet Pimpernel and his friends, in the wild hope that they would hear and have yet time to escape before it was too late. But she did not know how far from the edge of the cliff she was. She did not know if her shrieks would reach the ears of the doomed men. Her efforts might be premature, and she would never be allowed to make another. Her mouth would be securely gagged, like that of the Jew, and she a helpless prisoner in the hands of Chauvelin's men. Like a ghost, she flitted noiselessly behind that hedge. She had taken her shoes off, and her stockings were by now torn off her feet. She neither felt soreness nor weariness. Indomitable will to reach her husband in spite of adverse fate and of a cunning enemy killed all sense of bodily pain within her and rendered her instincts doubly acute. She heard nothing save the soft and measured footsteps of Percy's enemies on in front. She saw nothing but in her mind's eye that wooden hut and he, her husband, walking blindly to his doom. Suddenly, those same keen instincts within her made her pause in her mad haste and cower still further within the shadow of the hedge. The moon, which had proved a friend to her by remaining hidden behind a bank of clouds, now emerged in all the glory of an early autumn night, and in a moment flooded the weird and lonely landscape with a rush of brilliant light. There, not 200 meters ahead, was the edge of the cliff, and below, stretching far away to free and happy England, the sea rolled on smoothly and peaceably. Margaret's gaze rested for an instant on the brilliant silvery waters, and as she gazed, her heart, which had been numb with pain for all these hours, seemed to soften and distend, and her eyes filled with hot tears. Not 3 miles away, with white sails set, a graceful schooner lay in wait. Marguerite had guessed rather than recognized her. It was the Daydream, Percy's favorite yacht, with old Briggs, that prince of skippers aboard, and all her crew of British sailors. Her white sails glistening in the moonlight seemed to convey a message to Marguerite of joy and hope, which yet she feared could never be. She waited there out at sea, waited for her master, like a beautiful white bird all ready to take flight, and he would never reach her, never see her smooth decks again, never gaze any more on the white cliffs of England, the land of liberty and of hope. The sight of the schooner seemed to infuse into the poor, wearied woman the superhuman strength of despair. There was the edge of the cliff, and some way below was the hut, where presently her husband would meet his death. But the moon was out. She could see her way now. She could see the hut from a distance, run to it, arouse them all, and warn them at any rate to be prepared, and to sell their lives dearly rather than be caught like so many rats in a hole. She stumbled on behind the hedge in the low, thick grass of the ditch. She might have run on very fast and had outdistanced Chauvelin and Degas. Presently, she reached the edge of the cliff and heard their footsteps distinctly behind her. And only a very few yards away, and now the moonlight was full upon her, her figure must have been distinctly silhouetted behind the silvery background of the sea. Only for a moment, though. The next she had cowered like some animal doubled up within itself. She peeped down the great rugged cliffs. The descent would be easy enough, as they were not precipitous, and the great boulders afforded plenty of foothold. Suddenly, as she gazed, she saw some little distance on her left, and about midway down the cliffs, a rough wooden construction, through the walls of which a tiny red light glimmered like a beacon. Her very heart seemed to stand still. The eagerness of joy was so great that it felt like an awful pain. She could not gauge how distant the hut was, but without hesitation she began the steep descent, creeping from boulder to boulder, caring nothing for the enemy behind, or for the soldiers, who evidently had all taken cover since the tall Englishman had not yet appeared. On she pressed, forgetting the deadly foe on her track, running, stumbling, footsore, half-dazed, but still on, when suddenly a crevice or stone or slippery bit of rock threw her violently to the ground. She struggled to her feet again and started running forward once more to give them that timely warning, to beg them to flee before he came, to tell him to keep away from this death trap, away from this awful doom. But now she realized that other steps, quicker than her own, were already close at her heels. The next instant a hand dragged at her skirt, and she was down on her knees again, while something was wound round her mouth to prevent her uttering a scream. Bewildered, half frantic with the bitterness of disappointment, she looked round her helplessly, and bending down quite close to her, she saw through the mist which seemed to gather round her, a pair of keen, malicious eyes which appeared to her excited brain to have a weird, supernatural green light in them. She lay in the shadow of a great boulder. Chauvelin could not see her features, but he passed his thin, white fingers over her face. "A woman," he whispered, "by all the saints in the calendar! They cannot let her loose, that's certain," he muttered to himself. "I wonder now." Suddenly he paused, and after a few seconds of deadly silence, he gave forth a long, low, curious chuckle, while once again Marguerite felt with a horrible shudder his thin fingers wandering over her face. Dear me," he whispered with affected gallantry, "this is indeed a charming surprise." And Marguerite felt her resistless hand raised to Chauvelin's thin, mocking lips. The situation was indeed grotesque, had it not been at the same time so fearfully tragic. The poor, weary woman, broken in spirit and half frantic with the bitterness of her disappointment, receiving on her knees the banal gallantries of her deadly enemy. Her senses were leaving her. Half choked with a tight grip round her mouth, she had no strength to move or to utter the faintest sound. The excitement which all along had kept her up to her delicate body seemed at once to have subsided, and the feeling of blank despair to have completely paralyzed her brain and nerves. Chauvelin must have given some directions which she was too dazed to hear, for she felt herself lifted off her feet, the bandage round her mouth made more secure, and a pair of strong arms carried her towards the red tiny light on ahead, which she had looked upon as a beacon and the last faint glimmer of hope. Chapter 29. Trapped! She did not know how long she was thus carried along. She had lost all notion of time and space, and for a few seconds tired nature mercilessly deprived her of consciousness. When she had once more realized her state, she felt that she was placed with some degree of comfort upon a man's coat, with her back resting against a fragment of rock. The moon was hidden again behind some clouds, but darkness seemed in comparison more intense. The sea was roaring some 200 feet below her, and on looking all around she could no longer see any vestige of a tiny glimmer of red light. That the end of the journey had been reached, she gathered from the fact that she had heard rapid questions and answers spoken in a whisper quite close to her. "There are 4 men in there, citizen." Excuse me. "There are 4 men in there, citizen. They are sitting by the fire and seem to be waiting quietly. The hour? Nearly 2 o'clock. The tide? Coming quickly. The schooner? Obviously an English one lying some 3 kilometers out, but we cannot see her boat. Have the men taken cover? Yes, citizen. They will not blunder. They will not stir until the tall Englishman comes. Then they will surround and overpower the 5 men. Right. And the lady? Still dazed, I fancy. She's close beside you, citizen. And the Jew? He's gagged and his legs strapped together. He cannot move or scream. Good. Then have your gun ready in case you want it. Get close to the hut and leave me to look after the lady." Degas evidently... What?
Was that Chauvelin that said?
Yeah.
Leave me to look after the lady?
Yeah. Degas evidently obeyed, for Marguerite heard him creeping away along the stony cliff. Then she felt that a pair of warm, thin, talon-like hands took hold of both her own and held them in his grip of steel. "Before that handkerchief is removed from your pretty mouth, fair lady," whispered Chauvelin close to her ear, "I think it right to give you one small word of warning. What has procured me the honor of being followed across the channel by so charming a companion I cannot, of course, conceive. But if I mistake not, the purpose of this flattering attention is not one that would commend itself to my vanity, and I think that I am right in surmising, moreover, that the first sound which your pretty lips would utter, as soon as the cruel gag is removed, would be one that would prove a warning to the cunning fox which I have been at such pains to track to his lair." He paused a moment, while the steel-like grass seemed to tighten round her wrists. Then he resumed in the same hurried whisper. "Inside that hut, if again I am not mistaken, your brother, Armand Saint-Just, waits for that traitor de Tournay and 2 other men unknown to you for the arrival of the mysterious rescuer whose identity has so long puzzled our Committee of Public Safety, the audacious Scarlet Pimpernel. No doubt, if you scream, if there's a scuffle here, if shots are fired, it is more than likely that the same long legs that brought the Scarlet Enigma here will quickly take him to some place of safety." "What place is safety?" "The purpose, then, for which I have travelled all these miles will remain unaccomplished. On the other hand, if you only rest with yourself that your brother Armand shall be free to go off with you tonight if you like to England or any other place of safety." Marguerite could not utter a sound, as the handkerchief was wound very tightly round her mouth. But Chauvelin was peering through the darkness very closely into her face. No doubt, too, her hand gave a responsive appeal to his last suggestion. For presently he continued, "What I want you to do to ensure Armand's safety is a very simple thing, dear lady." "What is it?" Marguerite's hand seemed to convey to him in response. "To remain on the spot without uttering a sound, until I give you leave to speak. Ah, but I think you will obey," he added with that funny dry chuckle of his, as Marguerite's whole figure seemed to stiffen in defiance of his order. "But let me tell you that if you scream, nay, if you utter one sound, or attempt to move from here, my men, there are 30 of them about, will seize Saint-Just de Tournay and their 2 friends, and shoot them here by my orders before your eyes." Marguerite had listened to her implacable enemy's speech. Implacable. Implacable.
Implacable.
Implacable. her implacable enemy's speech with ever-increasing terror. Numbered with physical pain, she yet had sufficient mental vitality in her to realize with the full horror of this terrible either-or he was once more putting before her. Either-or 10,000 times more appalling and horrible than the one he suggested to her that fatal night at the ball. This time it meant that she should keep still and allow the husband she worshipped to walk unconsciously to his death, or that she should, by trying to give him a word of warning, which perhaps might even be unavailing, actually give the signal for her own brother's death and that of the 3 other unsuspecting men. She could not see Chauvelin, but she could also almost feel those keen pale eyes of his fixed maliciously upon her helpless form, and his hurried whispered words reached her ear as the death knell of her last faint lingering hope. Nay, fair lady, he added urbanely, you can have no interest in anyone save in St. Just, and all you need do for his safety is remain where you are and to keep silent. My men have strict orders to spare him in every way. As for that enigmatic Scarlet Pimpernel, what is he to you? Believe me, no warning from you could possibly save him. Oh! And now, dear lady, let me remove this unpleasant coercion, for it has been placed before your pretty mouth. Which has been placed before your pretty mouth. You see, I wish you to be perfectly free in the choice which you are about to make. He doesn't know that she knows that Percy's her husband.
Because he does know.
He knows it's Percy, but he doesn't know that she knows. He thinks that she's come to rescue her brother. And he's not going to tell her either.
Tell her what?
Ooh.
Tell her what?
He's not going to tell her that it's Percy.
Right.
He's saying, who is that? Who is this guy to you?
Yeah, that's...
You evil.
Yeah.
Evil man. Her thoughts in a whirl, her temples aching, her nerves paralyzed, her body numb with pain, Marguerite sat there in the darkness which surrounded her as with a pall. From where she sat, she could not see the sea, but she heard the incessant mournful murmur of the incoming tide, which spoke of her dead hopes, her lost love, the husband she had with her own hand betrayed and sent to his death. Marguerite removed the handkerchief from her mouth. She certainly did not scream at that moment. She had no strength to do anything but barely to hold herself upright and to force herself to think. Oh, think of what she should do. The minutes flew on in this awful stillness. She could not tell how fast or how slowly. She heard nothing. She saw nothing. She did not feel the sweet-smelling autumn air, scented with the briny odor of the sea. She no longer heard the murmur of the waves, the occasional rattling of a pebble, as it rolled down some steep incline. More and more unreal did the whole situation seem. It was impossible that she, Marguerite Blakeney, the queen of London society, should actually be sitting here on this bit of lonely coast, in the middle of the night, side by side with the most bitter enemy, and oh, it was not possible that somewhere, not many 100 feet away, perhaps, from where she stood, the being she had once despised, but who now, in every moment of this weird, dreamlike life, became more and more dear. It was not possible that he was unconsciously, even now, walking to his doom, while she did nothing to save him. Why did she not, with unearthly screams, that would re-echo from one end of the lonely beach to the other, send out a warning to him to desist, to retrace his steps, for death lurked here whilst he advanced? Once or twice the screams rose in her throat, as if by instinct. Then before her eyes there stood the awful alternative. Her brother and those 3 men shot before her eyes, practically by her orders, she their murderer. Oh, that fiend in human shape next to her knew human female nature well. He had played upon her feelings as a skillful musician plays upon an instrument. He had gauged her very thoughts to a nicety. She could not give that signal, for she was weak, and she was a woman. How could she deliberately order Armand to be shot before her eyes, to have his dear blood upon her head, he dying perhaps with a curse on her upon his lips? And little Suzanne's father, too. He, old man, and the others. Oh, it was all too horrible. Wait. How long? The early morning hours sped on, and yet it was not dawn. The sea continued its incessant mournful murmur. The autumnal breeze sighed gently in the night. The lonely beach was silent, even as the grave. Suddenly, from somewhere not very far away, a cheerful, strong voice was heard singing, "God Save the King."
Catherine, you want to read?
Yes. Chapter 30. The Schooner. Marguerite's aching heart stood still. She felt more than she heard the men on the watch preparing for the fight.
What?
She felt more than she heard, the men on the watch preparing for the fight. Her senses told her that each, with sword in hand, was crouching, ready for the spring. The voice came nearer and nearer in the vast immensity of these lonely cliffs, with a loud murmur of the sea behind, which was impossible to say how near, or how far, nor yet from which direction came that cheerful singer, who sang to God save his king, whilst he himself was in deadly danger. Faint at first, the voice grew louder and louder. From time to time, a small pebble detached itself apparently from beneath the firm tread of the singer, and went rolling down the rocky cliffs to the beach below. Marguerite, as she heard, felt that her very life was slipping away, as if when that voice drew nearer, when that singer became entrapped, she distinctly heard the click of Degas's gun close to her. No, 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 no! O God in heaven, this cannot be. Let Armand's blood then be upon her own head. Let her be branded as his murderer. Let even he whom she loved despise and loathe her for this. But God, O God, save him at any cost. With a wild shriek, she sprang to her feet and darted round the rock against which she had been covering. She saw the little red gleam through the chinks of the hut. She ran up to it and fell against its wooden walls, which she began to hammer with clenched fists in an almost maniacal frenzy, while she shouted, Armand, Armand, your leader's near, he's coming, he's betrayed, Armand, Armand, fire! Fire, in heaven's name! She was seized and thrown to the ground. She lay there moaning, bruised, not caring, but still half sobbing, half shrieking, Percy, my husband, fly! Armand, Armand, why don't you fire? One of you stop that woman screaming, hissed Chauvelin, who hardly could refrain from striking her. Something was thrown over her face. She could not breathe, and perforce she was silent. The bold singer, too, had become silent, warned, no doubt, of his impending danger by Marguerite's frantic shrieks. The men had sprung to their feet. There was no need for further silence on their part, for the very cliffs echoed the poor heartbroken woman's screams. Chauvelin, with a muttered oath which boded no good to her, had dared to upset his most cherished plans, had hastily shouted the word of command, Into it, my men, let no one escape from that hut alive! The moon had once more emerged from between the clouds. The darkness on the cliffs had gone, giving place once more to brilliant silvery light. Some of the soldiers had rushed to the rough wooden door of the hut, whilst one of them kept guard over Marguerite. The door was partially open, while one of the soldiers pushed it further, but within all was darkness, the charcoal fire only lighting with a dim red light the farthest corner of the hut. The soldiers paused automatically at the door, like machines waiting for further orders. Chauvelin, who was prepared for a violent onslaught from within and for a vigorous resistance from the four fugitives under cover of the darkness, was for the moment paralyzed with astonishment when he saw the soldiers standing there at attention like sentries on guard, whilst not a sound proceeded from the hut. Filled with strange, anxious foreboding, he too went to the door of the hut, and peering into the gloom, he asked quickly, What is the meaning of this? I think, citizen, that there is no one there now, replied one of the soldiers imperturbably. You have not let those 4 men go, thundered Chauvelin menacingly. I ordered you to let no man escape alive. Quick, after them, all of you, quick in every direction. The men, obedient as machines, rushed down the rocky incline towards the beach, some going off to the right and some going off to right and left as fast as their feet could carry them. You and your men will pay with your lives for this blunder, citizen sergeant, said Chauvelin viciously to the sergeant who had been in charge of the men. And you too, citizen, he added, turning with a snarl to Degas. And you too, citizen, he added, turning with a snarl to Degas, for disobeying my orders. You ordered us to wait, citizen, until the tall Englishman arrived and joined the 4 men in the hut. No one came, said the sergeant sullenly. But I ordered you just now, and the woman screamed to rush in and let no one escape. But, citizen, the 4 men who were there before had been gone some time, I think. You think? You, said Chauvelin, almost choking with fury, and you let them go? You ordered us to wait, citizen, protested the sergeant, and to implicitly obey your commands on pain of death. We waited. I heard the men creep out of the hut not many minutes after we took cover, and long before the woman screamed. Oh.
That's hilarious.
He added, wait a minute. Wait. Well, he's told them to wait for the tall stream. Percy.
Right.
He didn't say anything about the four guys in the hut. Oh, that's great.
That's so funny.
Oh, that's great.
He added as Chauvelin seemed still quite speechless with rage. Hark! Said Degas suddenly. In the distance, the sound of repeated firing was heard. Chauvelin tried to peer along the beach below, but as luck would have it, the fitful moon once more hid her light behind a bank of clouds, and he could see nothing. One of you go into the hut and strike a light, he stammered at last. Stolidly, the sergeant obeyed. He went up to this charcoal fire and lit the small lantern he carried in his bait. It was evident that the hut was quite empty. Which way did they go? Said Chauvelin. I could not tell, citizen, said the sergeant. They went straight down the cliff first, then disappeared behind some boulders. Hush! What was that? All three men listened attentively. In the very far distance could be heard faintly echoing and already dying away the quick, sharp splash of half a dozen oars. Chauvelin took out his handkerchief and wiped the perspiration from his forehead. The schooner's boat was all he gasped. Evidently, Almance Edgeus and his three companions had managed to creep along the side of the cliffs, whilst the men, like true soldiers of the well-drilled Republican army, had with blind obedience and in fear of their lives implicitly obeyed Chauvelin's orders to wait for the tall Englishman who was the important capture. They had no doubt reached one of the creeks which jut far out to sea on this coast at intervals. Behind this, the boat of the Danger must have been on the lookout for them, and they were by now safely on board the British schooner. As if to confirm this last supposition, the dull boom of a gun was heard from out at sea. The schooner, citizen, said Degas quietly. She's off. It needed all Chauvelin's nerve and presence of mind not to give way to a useless and undignified access of rage. Undignified. There was no doubt now that once again that accursed British head had completely outwitted him. How he had contrived to reach the hut without being seen by one of the 30 soldiers who guarded the spot was more than Chauvelin could have conceived. That he had done so before the 30 men had arrived on the cliff was, of course, fairly clear, but now he had come over in Reuben Goldstein's cart all the way from Calais without being sighted by the various patrols on duty was impossible of explanation. It really seemed as if some potent fate watched over that daring Scarlet Pimpernel, and his astute enemy often felt a superstitious shudder pass through him as he looked around the towering cliffs and the loneliness of this outlying coast. But surely this was reality, and the year of grace 1792, there was no fairies and hobgoblins about. Chauvelin and his 30 men had all heard with their own ears that accursed voice singing God Save the King, fully 20 minutes after they had all taken cover around the hut. By that time the four fugitives must have reached the creek and got into the boat, and the nearest creek was more than a mile from the hut. Where had that daring singer got to? Unless Satan himself had lent him wings, he could not have covered that mile on a rocky cliff in the space of 2 minutes, and only 2 minutes had elapsed between his song and the sound of the boat's oars away at sea. He must have remained behind, and was even now hiding somewhere about the cliffs. The patrols were still about, he would still be sighted, no doubt. Chauvelin felt hopeful once again. One or two of the men who had run after the fugitives were now slowly working their way up the cliff. One of them reached Chauvelin aside at the very moment that this hope rose in the astute diplomatist's heart. We were too late, citizen, the Chauvelin said. We reached the bank just before the moon was hidden by that bank of clouds. The boat had undoubtedly been on the lookout behind the first creek, a mile off, but she had shoved off some time ago when we got to the beach and was already some way out to sea. We fired after her, but of course it was no good. She was making straight and quickly for the schooner. We saw her very clearly in the moonlight. Yes, said Chauvelin with eager impatience. She had shoved off some time ago, you said, and the nearest creek is a mile further on. Yes, citizen, I ran all the way straight to the beach, though I guess the boat would have waited somewhere near the creek, as tide would reach there earliest. The boat must have shoved off some minutes before the woman began to scream. Then Chauvelin's hopes had not deceived him. The Scarlet Pimpernel may have contrived to send the fugitives on ahead by the boat, but he himself had not had time to reach it. He was still on shore, and all the roads were well patrolled. At any rate, all was not yet lost, and would not be, whilst that impudent Britisher was still on French soil.
Bring the light in here, he commanded eagerly, as he once more entered the hut. The sergeant brought his lantern. Together the two men explored the little place. With a rapid glance, Chauvelin noted its contents. The cauldron placed close under an aperture in the wall, and containing the last few dying embers of burned charcoal. The couple of stools, overturned as if in haste or sudden departure. Then the fisherman's tools and his nets lying in one corner, and beside them something small and white. Pick that up, said Chauvelin to the sergeant, pointing to this white scrap, and bring it to me. It was a crumpled piece of paper, evidently forgotten there by the fugitives in their hurry to get away. The sergeant, much awed by the citizen's obvious rage and impatience, picked up the paper and handed it respectfully to Chauvelin. Read it, sergeant, said the latter curtly. It is almost illegible, citizen, a fearful scrawl. I ordered you to read it, repeated Chauvelin viciously. The sergeant, by the light of his lantern, began deciphering the few hastily scrawled words. I cannot quite reach you without risking your lives and endangering the success of your rescue. When you receive this, wait 2 minutes, then creep out of the hut one by one, turn to your left sharply, and creep cautiously down the cliff, keep to the left all the time, till you reach the first rock which you see jutting far out to the sea. Behind it, in the creek, the boat is on the lookout for you. Give a long, sharp whistle. She will come up, get into her, and my men will row you to the schooner, and thence to England in safety. Once on board the Daydream, send the boat back for me. Tell my men that I shall be at the creek, which is in a direct line opposite the Chagris near Calais. They know it. I shall be there as soon as possible. They must wait for me at a safe distance out at sea till they heard the usual signal. Do not delay, and obey these instructions with simplicity. There is the signature, citizen, added the sergeant, as he handed the paper back to Chauvelin. But the latter had not waited an instant. One phrase of the momentous scrawl had caught his ear. I shall be at the creek, which is in a direct line opposite the Chagris near Calais. That phrase might yet mean victory for him. Which of you knows this coast well? He shouted to his men, who now, one by one, had all returned from their fruitless run, and were all assembled once more around the hut. I do, citizen, said one of them. I was born in Calais, know every stone of these cliffs. There is a creek in a direct line from the Chagris. There is, citizen, I know it well. The Englishman is hoping to reach that creek. He does not know every stone in these cliffs. He may go there by the longest way round, and in any case he will proceed cautiously for fear of the patrols. At any rate, there is a chance to get him yet. 1,000 francs to each man who gets to that creek before that long-legged Englishman. I know a shortcut round the cliffs, said the soldier, and with an enthusiastic shout he rushed forward, followed closely by his comrades.
I just see this all.
I know. Within a few minutes, their running footsteps had died away in the distance. Chauvelin listened to them for a moment. The promise of the reward was lending spurs to the soldiers of the Republic. The gleam of hate and anticipated triumph was once more apparent on his face. Close to him, Degas still stood mute and impassive, waiting for further orders, whilst 2 soldiers were kneeling behind the prostrate form of Marguerite. Chauvelin gave his secretary a vicious look. His well-laid plan had failed. The sequel was problematical. There was still a great chance now that the Scarlet Pimpernel might yet escape, and Chauvelin, with that unreasonable fury which sometimes assails a strong nature, was longing to vent his rage on somebody. The soldiers were holding Marguerite pinioned to the ground, though she, poor soul, was not making the faintest struggle. Overwrought nature had at last peremptorily asserted herself, and she lay there in a dead swoon, her eyes circled by deep purple lines that told of long sleepless nights, her hair matted and damp round her forehead, her lips parted in a sharp curve that spoke of physical pain. The cleverest woman in Europe, the elegant and fashionable Lady Blakeney, had dazzled London society with her beauty, her wit, and her extravagances, presented a very pathetic picture of tired-out, suffering womanhood, which would have appealed to any but the hard, vengeful heart of her baffled enemy. It is no use mounting guard over a woman who is half dead, he said spitefully to the soldiers, when you have allowed 5 men who were very much alive to escape. Obediently the soldiers rose to their feet. You better try and find that footpath round again for me, and that broken-down cart we left on the road. Then suddenly a bright idea seemed to strike him. Ah, by the by, where is the Jew? Close by here, citizen, said Degas. I gagged him and tied his legs together as you commanded. From the immediate vicinity, a plain plaintive moan reached Chauvelin's ears. He followed his secretary, who led the way to the other side of the hut, where fallen into an absolute heap of dejection, with his legs tightly pinioned together and his mouth gagged, lay the unfortunate descendant of Israel. His face in the silvery light of the moon looked positively ghastly with terror. His eyes were wide open and almost glassy, and his whole body was trembling, as if with ague, while a piteous wail escaped his bloodless lips. The rope which had originally been wound round his shoulders and arms had evidently given way, for it lay in a tangle about his body. But he seemed quite unconscious of this, for he had not made the slightest attempt to move from the place where Degas had originally put him, like a terrified chicken, which looks upon a line of white chalk drawn on a table, as if on a string which paralyzes its movements. "Bring the cowardly brute here," commanded Chauvelin. He certainly felt exceedingly vicious, and since he had no reasonable grounds for venting his ill humor on the soldiers who had but too punctually obeyed his orders, he felt that the son of the despised race would prove an excellent butt. With true French contempt of the Jew, which has survived the lapse of centuries even to this day, he would not go too near him, but said with biting sarcasm, as the wretched old man was brought in full light of the moon by the two soldiers, "I suppose now that being a Jew you have a good memory for bargains?" "Answer," he again commanded, as the Jew with trembling lips seemed too frightened to speak. "Yes, your honor," stammered the poor wretch. "You remember then the one you and I made together in Calais, when you undertook to overtake Reuben Goldstein, his nag, and my friend the tall stranger, eh? But, your honor, there is no but. I said, do you remember?" Yes, your honor." "What was the bargain?" There was dead silence. The unfortunate man looked round at the great cliffs, the moon above, the stolid faces of the soldiers, and even at the poor, prostrate, inanimate woman close by, but said nothing. "Will you speak?" thundered Chauvelin menacingly. He did try, poor wretch, but obviously he could not. There was no doubt, however, that he knew what to expect from the stern man before him. "Your honor," he ventured imploringly, "since your terror seems to have paralyzed your tongue," said Chauvelin sarcastically, "I must needs refresh your memory. It was agreed between us that if we overtook my friend the tall stranger before he reached this place, you were to have 10 pieces of gold." A low moan escaped from the Jew's trembling lips. "But," added Chauvelin with slow emphasis, "if you deceived me in your promise, you were to have a sound beating, one that would teach you not to tell lies." I did not, your honor. I swear by Aram and by all the other patriarchs I know. Unfortunately, they are still... Now, you need not fulfill your share of the bargain, and I am too ready to fulfill mine. Here," he added, turning to the soldiers, "the buckle end of your 2 belts to this confounded Jew." The soldiers obediently unbuckled their heavy leather belts, and the Jew set up a howl. "I think I can rely on you, citizen soldiers," laughed Chauvelin maliciously, "to give this old liar the best and soundest beating he has ever experienced. But don't kill him," he added dryly. "We will obey, citizen," replied the soldiers as imperturbably as ever. He did not wait to see his orders carried out. He knew that he could trust these soldiers, who were still smarting under his rebuke, not to mince matters when given a free hand to belabor a third party. "When that lumbering coward has had his punishment," he said to Degas, "the men can guide us back as far as the cart, and one of them can drive us in it back to Calais. The Jew and the woman can look after each other," he added roughly, "until we can send somebody for them in the morning. They can't run away very far in their present condition, and we cannot be troubled with them just now." Chauvelin had not given up all hope. His men, he knew, were spurred on by the hope of the reward. That enigmatic and audacious Scarlet Pimpernel, alone and with 30 men at his heels, could not reasonably be expected to escape a second time. That enigmatic and audacious Scarlet Pimpernel, alone and with 30 men at his heels, could not reasonably be expected to escape a second time. But he felt less sure now. The Englishman's audacity had baffled him once, whilst the wooden-headed stupidity of the soldiers, and the interference of a woman who had turned his hand, which held all the trumps into a losing one. If Marguerite had not taken up his time, if the soldiers had had a grain of intelligence, if the soldiers had had a grain of intelligence, if was a long if, and so Chauvelin stood for a moment quite still and enrolled 30-odd people in one long, overwhelming anathema. Nature, poetic, silent, and balmy, the bright moon, the calm, silvery sea, spoke of beauty and of rest, and Chauvelin cursed nature, cursed man and woman, and above all he cursed all long-legged, meddlesome British enigmas with one gigantic curse. The howls of the Jew behind him, undergoing his punishment, sent a bomb through his heart, overburdened as it was with revengeful malice. He smiled. It eased his mind to think that some human being, at least, was like himself, not altogether at peace with mankind. He turned and took a last look at the lonely bit of coast, which stood where stood the wooden hut, now bathed in moonlight, the scene of the greatest discomfiture ever experienced by a leading member of the Committee of Public Safety. Against a rock, on a hard bed of stone, lay the unconscious figure of Marguerite Blakeney, while some few paces further on, the unfortunate Jew was receiving on his broad back the blows of 2 stout leather belts, wielded by the stolid arms of 2 sturdy soldiers of the Republic. The howls of Benjamin Rosenbaum were fit to make the dead rise from their graves. They must have awakened all the gulls from sleep and made them look down with great interest at the doings of the lords of the creation. "That will do," commanded Chauvelin as the Jew's moans became more feeble and the poor wretch seemed to have fainted away. "We don't want to kill him." Obediently the soldiers buckled on their belts, while one of them viciously kicked the Jew to the one side. "Leave him there," said Chauvelin, "and lead the way now quickly to the cart. I'll follow." He walked up to where Marguerite lay and looked down into her face. She had evidently recovered consciousness and was making feeble efforts to raise herself. Her large blue eyes were looking at the moonlit scene round her with a scared and terrified look. They rested with a mixture of horror and pity on the Jew whose luckless fate and wild howls had been the first signs that struck her with her returning senses. Then she caught sight of Chauvelin in his neat dark clothes, which seemed hardly crumpled after the stirring events of the last few hours. He was smiling sarcastically, and his pale eyes peered down at her with a look of intense malice. With mock gallantry, he stooped and raised her icy-cold hand to his lips, which sent a thrill of indescribable loathing through Marguerite's weary frame. "I much regret, fair lady," he said in his most suave tone, that circumstances over which I have no control compel me to leave you here for the moment. But I go away secure in the knowledge that I do not leave you here unprotected. Our friend Benjamin here, though a trifle the worse for wear at the present moment, will provide a gallant defender of your fair person, I have no doubt. At dawn I will send an escort for you. Until then, I feel sure that you will find him devoted, though perhaps a trifle slow." Marguerite only had the strength to turn her head away. Her head was broken with cruel anguish. One awful thought had returned to her mind, together with gathering consciousness. What had become of Percy? What of Armand? She knew nothing of what had happened after she heard the cheerful song, "God Save the King," which she believed to be the signal of death. "I myself," concluded Chauvelin, "must now very reluctantly leave you. Au revoir, fair lady. We meet, I hope, soon in London. Shall I see you at the Prince of Wales's garden party? No? Ah, well. Au revoir. Remember me, I pray, to Sir Percy Blakeney." And with a last ironical smile and bow, he once more kissed her hand and disappeared down the footpath in the wake of the soldiers, followed by the imperturbable Degas. Okay, last chapter. Chapter 31. The escape. Margaret listened, half dazed as she was, to the fast retreating, firm footsteps of the 4 men. All nature was so still that she, lying with her ear close to the ground, could distinctly trace the sound of their tread, as they ultimately turned into the road, and presently the faint echo of the old cart wheels, the halting gait of the lean nag, told her that her enemy was a quarter of a league away. How long she lay there she knew not. She had lost count of time. Dreamily she looked up at the moonlit sky and listened to the monotonous roll of the waves. The invigorating scent of the sea was nectar to her wearied body. The immensity of the lonely cliffs was silent and dreamlike. Her brain only remained conscious of his ceaseless, intolerable torture of uncertainty. She did not know. She did not know. Hey, Hoover. She did not know whether Percy was now even at this moment in the hands of the soldiers of the Republic, enduring, as she had done herself, the jibes and jeers of his malicious enemy. She did not know, on the other hand, whether Armand's lifeless body did not lie there, in the hut, whilst Percy had escaped, only to hear that his wife's hands had guided the human bloodhound to the murder of Armand and his friends. The physical pain of utter weariness was so great that she hoped confidently her tired body could rest here forever, after all the turmoil, the passion, the intrigues of the last few days. Here, beneath that clear sky, within sound of the sea, and with this balmy autumn breeze whispering to her a last lullaby. All was so solitary, so silent, like unto dreamland. Even the last faint echo of the distant cart had long ago died away afar. Suddenly, a sound, the strangest undoubtedly that these lonely cliffs of France had ever heard, broke the silent solemnity. Suddenly, a sound, the strangest undoubtedly that these lonely cliffs of France had ever heard, broke the silent solemnity of the shore. So strange a sound was it that the gentle breeze ceased to murmur, the tiny pebbles to roll down the steep incline. So strange that Marguerite, wearied and overawed as she was, thought that the beneficial unconsciousness of the approach of death was playing her half-sleeping senses a weird and elusive trick. It was the sound of a good, solid, absolutely British, oh, dash it all. The seagulls in their nests awoke, and looked around in astonishment. I'm all astonishment! A distant and solitary owl set up a midnight hoot. The tall cliffs frowned down majestically at the strange, unheard-of sacrilege. Marguerite did not trust her ears. Half raising herself on her hands, she strained every sense to see or hear, to know the meaning of this very earthly sound. All was still again for the space of a few seconds. The same silence once more came upon the great and lonely vastness. Then Marguerite, who had listened as in a trance, who had felt she must be dreaming with that cool, magnetic moonlight overheard, heard again. And this time her heart stood still, her eyes large and dilated, looked round her, not daring to trust to her other sense. Odd's life, but I wish those dash fellows had not kicked me quite so hard. This time it was quite unmistakable. Only one particularly pair of essentially British lips could have uttered those words in sleepily, drawly, affected tones. Dash it all, repeated those same British lips emphatically. Silence, but I was weak as a rat. In a moment, Marguerite was on her feet. Was she dreaming? Were those great stony cliffs the gates of paradise? Was the fragrant breath of the breeze suddenly caused by the flutter of angels' wings, bringing tidings of unearthly joys to her, after all her suffering, or faint or ill, or was she the prey of delirium? She listened again, and once again she heard the same very earthly sounds of good, honest British language, not the least akin to whisperings from paradise or flutter of angels' wings. She looked round her eagerly at the tall cliffs, the lonely hut, the great stretch of rocky beach. Somewhere there, above or below her, behind a boulder or crevice, inside a crevice, but still hidden from her longing, feverish eyes, must be the owner of that voice, which once used to irritate her, but which now would make her the happiest woman in Europe, if only she could locate it. Percy! Percy! She shrieked hysterically, tortured between doubt and hope. I am here! Come to me! Where are you? Percy! Percy! It's all very well calling me, my dear, said the same sleepy, drawly voice. But odds life, I cannot come to you. Those dashed frog-eaters have trussed me up like a goose on a spit, and I was weak as a mouse. I could not get away. But still, Marguerite did not understand. She did not realize for at least another 10 seconds whence came that voice so drawly, so dear, but alas, with a but alas with a strange accent of weakness and of suffering. There was no one within sight except by that rock. The Jew! Was she mad or dreaming? His back was against the pale moonlight. He was half crouching, trying vainly to raise himself with his arms tightly pinioned. Marguerite ran up to him, took his head in both her hands, and looked straight into a pair of blue eyes, good-natured, even a trifle amused, shining out of the weird and distorted mask of the Jew. "Percy! Percy, my husband!" she gasped, faint with the fullness of her joy. "Thank God! Thank God!" "La, my dear," he rejoined good-humoredly. "We will both do that anon, and you think you can loosen these dash ropes and release me from my inelegant attitude?" She had no knife, her fingers were numb and weak, but she worked away with her teeth, while great welcome tears poured from her eyes onto those poor pinioned hands. "Odd's life," he said, when at last, after frantic efforts on her part, the ropes seemed at last to be giving way. "But I marvel whether it has ever happened before that an English gentleman allowed himself to be licked by a dashed foreigner and made no attempt to give as good as he got." It was very obvious that he was exhausted from sheer physical pain, and when at last the rope gave way, he fell in a heap beside the rock. Marguerite looked helplessly around her. "Oh, for a drop of water on this awful beach," she cried in agony, seeing that he was ready to faint again. "Nay, my dear," he murmured with his good-humored smile. "Personally, I should prefer a drop of good French brandy. And you'll dive into the pocket of this dirty old garment. You'll find my flask. I am dashed if I can move." When he had drunk some brandy, he forced Marguerite to do likewise. "La, that's better now, eh, little woman?" he said with a sigh of satisfaction. "Hey-ho, this is a queer rig-up for Sir Percy Blakeney. Baronet, to be found in by his lady, and no mistake. Begad," he added, passing his hand over his chin, "I haven't been shaved for nearly 20 hours. I must look a disgusting object. And as for these curls," he laughingly took off the disfiguring wig and curls and stretched out his long limbs, which were cramped from many hours stooping. Then he bent forward and looked long and searchingly into his wife's blue eyes. "Percy," she whispered, while a deep blush suffused her delicate cheeks and neck, "if you only knew—" "I do know, dear, everything," he said with infinite gentleness. "And can you ever forgive?" "I have not to forgive, sweetheart. Your heroism, your devotion, which I alas so little deserved, have more than atoned for that unfortunate episode at the ball." "Then you knew?" she whispered. "All the time?" "Yes," he replied tenderly. "I knew all the time, but begad, had I but known what a noble heart yours was, my Margot, I should have trusted you as you deserved to be trusted, and you would not have had to undergo the terrible sufferings of the past few hours in order to run after a husband who has done so much that needs forgiveness." They were sitting side by side, leaning up against a rock, and he rested his aching head on her shoulder. She certainly now deserved the name of the happiest woman in Europe. "It is a case of the blind leading the lame, is it not, sweetheart?" he said with his good-natured smile of old. "Odd's life, but I do not know which are the more sore, my shoulders or your little feet." He bent forward to kiss them, for they peeped out through her torn stockings and bore pathetic witness to her endurance and devotion. "But Armand," she said with sudden terror and remorse, as in the midst of her happiness the image of the bubble up. But Armand, she said with sudden terror and remorse, as in the midst of her happiness the image of the beloved brother, for whose sake she had so deeply sinned, rose now before her mind. "Oh, have no fear for Armand, sweetheart," he said tenderly. "Did I not pledge you my word that he should be safe? He with the tourney, and the others are even now on board the Daydream." "But how?" she gasped. "I did not understand." "Yet 'tis simple enough, my dear," he said with that funny half-shy, half-inane laugh of his. "You see, when I found that brute Chauvelin meant to stick to me like a leech, that I thought the best thing I could do, as I could not shake him off, was to take him along with me. I had to get to Armand and the others somehow, and all the roads were patrolled, and every one on the lookout for your humble servant. I knew that when I slipped through Chauvelin's fingers at the Chagris that he would lie in wait for me there, whichsoever way I took. I wanted to keep an eye on him and his doings, and a British head is always as good. And a British head is as good as a French one any day. Indeed, it had proved to be infinitely better, and Marguerite's heart was filled with joy and marvel as he continued to recount to her the daring manner in which he had snatched the fugitives away, right from under Chauvelin's very nose. Dressed as the dirty old Jew, he said gaily, I knew I should not be recognized. I had met Reuben Goldstein in Calais earlier in the evening. For a few gold pieces he supplied me with this rig out, and undertook to bury himself out of sight of everybody whilst he lent me his cart and nag. But if Chauvelin had discovered you, she gasped excitedly, your disguise was good, but he is so sharp. Odds fish, he rejoined quietly. Then certainly the game would have been up. I could but take the risk. I know human nature pretty well by now, he added with a note of sadness in his cheery young voice, and I know those Frenchmen in and out and out. They so loathe the Jew that they never come nearer than a couple of yards of him, and begad, I fancied that I contrived to make myself look about as loathsome as an object as it is possible to conceive. Yes? And then? She asked eagerly. Zooks! Then I carried out my little plan. That is to say, at first I only determined to leave everything as to chance. But when I heard Chauvelin giving his orders to the soldiers, I knew that fate and I were going to work together after all. I reckoned on the blind obedience of the soldiers. Chauvelin had ordered them on pain of death not to stir until the tall Englishman came. The Goths had thrown me down in a heap quite close to the hut. The soldiers took no notice of the Jew who had driven citizen Chauvelin to this spot. I managed to free myself from the ropes, with which the brute had trussed me. I always carried pencil and paper with me wherever I go, and I hastily scrawled a few important instructions on the scrap of paper. Then I looked about me. I crawled up to the hut under the very noses of the soldiers who lay under cover without stirring, just as Chauvelin had ordered them to do. Then I dropped my little note into the hut, through a chink in the wall, and waited. In this note I told the fugitives to walk noiselessly out of the hut, creep down the cliffs, keep to the left until they came to the first creek, to give a certain signal, when the boat of the Daydream, which lay in wait not too far out to sea, would pick them up. They obeyed implicitly, fortunately for me and them. The soldier, fortunately for them and for me. The soldiers who saw them were equally obedient to Chauvelin's orders. They did not stir. I waited for nearly half an hour. When I knew that the fugitives were safe, I gave the signal, which caused so much stir. And that was the whole story. It seemed so simple, and Marguerite could marvel at the wonderful ingenuity, the boundless pluck and audacity which had evolved and helped to carry out this daring plan. But those brutes struck you! She gasped in horror at the bare recollection of the fear and indignity. Well, that could not be helped, he said gently. Whilst my little wife's fate was so uncertain, I had to remain here by her side. Odd's life, he added merrily. Never fear, Chauvelin will lose nothing by waiting. I warrant I wait till I get him back to England. La, he shall pay for the thrashing he gave me with compound interest, I promise you. Marguerite laughed. It was so good to be beside him, to hear his cheery voice, to watch that good-humoured twinkle in his blue eyes as he stretched out his long arms, in longing for that foe in anticipation of his well-deserved punishment. Suddenly, however, she started, the happy blush left her cheek, the light of joy died out of her eyes. She had heard a stealthy footfall overhead, and a stone had rolled down from the top of the cliffs right down to the beach below. What's that? She whispered in horror and alarm. Oh, nothing, my dear, he muttered with a pleasant laugh. Only a trifle you happen to have forgotten. My friend Fuchs. Sir Andrew, she gasped. Indeed, she had wholly forgotten the devoted friend and companion who had trusted and stood by her side during these hours of anxiety and suffering. She remembered him now, tardily, and with a pang of remorse. Ah, you had forgotten him, hadn't you, my dear? Said Sir Percy merrily. Fortunately, I met him not far from the Chagris, before I had the interesting supper-party with my friend Chauvelin. Odd's life, but I had a score to settle with that young reprobate. But in the meanwhile, I told him of a very long, very roundabout road that would bring him here by a very circuitous road, which Chauvelin's man would never suspect. Just about the time we were ready for him, eh, little woman? And he obeyed? Asked Marguerite, not in astonishment. Without word or question. See, here he comes. He was not in the way when I did not want him, and now he arrives in the nick of time. Ah, he will make pretty little Suzanne a most admirable and methodical husband. In the meanwhile, Sir Andrew Fuchs had cautiously worked his way down the cliffs. He stopped once or twice, pausing to listen for for the whispered words which would guide him to Blakeney's hiding place. "Blakeney?" he ventured to say at last, cautiously. "Blakeney, are you there?" The next moment he found rounded the rock against which Sir Percy and Margaret were leaning, and seeing the weird figure still clad in the Jew's long gabardine, he paused in sudden complete bewilderment. But already Blakeney had struggled to his feet. "Here I am, friend," he said with his funny inane laugh. "All alive, though I do look a big-eyed scarecrow with these dashed things." "Zooks!" ejaculated Sir Andrew in boundless astonishment as he recognized his leader. The young man had seen Marguerite and happily checked the forcible language that rose to his lips at sight of exquisite Sir Percy in this weird and dirty garb. Yes, said Blakeney calmly. "Of all the my friend, I have not yet had time to ask you what you were doing in France when I ordered you to remain in London. Insubordination, what? Wait till my shoulders are less sore, and by gad, you see the punishment you'll get." "Odds fish, I'll bear it," said Sir Andrew with a merry laugh, "seeing that you are alive to give it. Would you have had me allow Lady Blakeney to do the journey alone? But, man, where did you get those extraordinary clothes?" "Lad, they are a bit quaint, aren't they?" laughed Sir Percy jovially. "But odds fish," he added with sudden earnestness and authority, "now you are here, Fuchs, we must lose no more time. That brute Chauvelin may send someone to look after us." Margaret was so happy she could have stayed here forever, hearing his voice, asking 100 questions. But at the mention of Chauvelin's name she started in quick alarm, afraid for the dear life she would have died to save. "But how can we get back?" she gasped. "The roads are full of shoulders between here and Calais, and—" "But we are not going back to Calais, sweetheart," she said, "but just to the other side of Grenez, not half a league from here. The boat of the Daydream will meet us there." "The boat of the Daydream?" "Yes," he said with a merry laugh, "another little trick of mine. I should have told you that before. When I slipped that note into the hut, I also added another for Armand, which I directed him to leave behind, and which has sent Chauvelin and his men running full tilt back to the Chagris after me. But the first little note contained my real instructions, including those to old Briggs. He had my orders to go out further to sea, and then towards the west. When well out of sight of Calais, he will send the galley to a little creek he and I know of, just beyond Grenez. The men will look out for me. We have a preconcerted signal, and we will all be safely aboard, whilst Chauvelin and his men solemnly sit and watch the creek, which is just opposite the Chagris. The other side of Grenez, but I cannot walk, Percy. The other side of Grenez, but I cannot walk, Percy." She moaned helplessly as, trying to struggle to her tired feet, she found herself unable even to stand. "I will carry you, dear," he said simply. "The blind leading the lame, you know." Sir Andrew was ready, too, to help with the precious burden, but Sir Percy could not entrust his beloved to any eyes but his own. When you and she are both safely on board the Daydream," he said to his young comrade, "and I feel that Mademoiselle Suzanne's eyes will not greet me in England with reproachful looks, then it will be my turn to rest." And his arms, still vigorous in spite of fatigue and suffering, closed round Margaret's poor weary body, and lifted her as gently as if she had been a feather. Then, as Sir Andrew discreetly kept out of earshot, there were many things said, or rather whispered, which even the autumn breeze did not catch, for it had gone to rest. All his fatigue was forgotten. His shoulders must have been very sore, for the soldiers had hit hard, but the man's muscles seemed made of steel, and his energy was almost supernatural. It was a weary tramp, half a league along the stony side of the cliffs, but never for a moment did his courage give way or his muscles yield to fatigue. On he tramped with firm footstep, his vigorous arms encircling the precious burden, and no doubt, as she lay quiet and happy, at times lulled to momentary drowsiness, at others watching through the slowly gathering morning light the pleasant face with the lazy drooping blue eyes, ever cheerful, ever illumined with a good-humoured smile, she whispered many things which helped to shorten the weary road, and acted as a soothing balsam to his aching sinews. The many-hued light of dawn was breaking in the east, when at last they reached the creek beyond Grenez. The galley lay in wait in answer to a
to a signal from Sir Percy, she drew near, and two sturdy British soldiers had the honour of carrying my lady onto the boat. Half an hour later they were on board the Daydream. The crew, who of necessity were in their master's secrets, and who were devoted to him heart and soul, were not surprised to see him arriving in so extraordinary a disguise. Armand St-Just and the other fugitives were eagerly awaiting the advent of their brave rescuer. He would not stay to hear the expressions of their gratitude, but found the way to his private cabin as quickly as he could, leaving Marguerite quite happy in the arms of her brother. Everything on board the Daydream was fitted with that exquisite luxury so dear to Sir Percy Blakeney's heart, and by the time they all landed at Dover he had found time to get into some of the sumptuous clothes which he loved, and of which he always kept a supply on board his yacht. The difficulty was to provide Margaret with a pair of shoes, and great was the little middy's joy when my lady found that she could put foot on English shore in his best pair. The rest is silence. Silence and joy for those who had endured so much suffering, yet found at last a great and lasting happiness. But it is on record that at the brilliant wedding of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, Baronet, with Mademoiselle Suzanne de Tournay de Basserive, a function at which His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and all the elite of fashionable society were present, the most beautiful woman there was unquestionably Lady Blakeney, whilst the clothes of Sir Percy Blakeney were the talk of the jeunesse dorée of London for many days. It is also a fact that Monsieur Chapelain, the accredited agent of the French Republican government, was not present at that or any other social function in London after that memorable evening at Laurel Grenville's ball.
Is it? Really?
Yep.
Like all the way?
Yeah.
It's over.
Alright, now what were all the things I was going to say that you wouldn't let me say until we were done?
Okay, I got one.
No. What was I going to say?
I don't remember. I remember what I was gonna say. How should I remember what you were gonna say?
I started to say it.
I don't. But you're not finished to say it. No. Okay. When he undid, when they went back and showed that the Jew had undid some of his.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Some of his bonds.
The rope.
Yes, the rope.
When he was all tangled in the rope.
Yes.
I suspected.
I suspected that he was about to go away, and then he heard Marguerite yelling to Percy, and he realized that it was her, and therefore he stayed because of her. But I was wrong. I thought.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
I forget. Yeah. What was I thinking? I was confused because I remember that he was the Jew from reading this before. He was in disguise as the Jew before,
Right.
but I couldn't remember. But I couldn't when he started saying at the beginning. When we first were introduced to the Jew, was talking about Reuben and that kind of thing. I didn't know if Sir Percy was dressed as this Jew or was he dressed as the Reuben, or was he Reuben? Yeah. Anyway. It wasn't in Reuben's disguise, so I didn't know who was going to end
That
up
was
being.
quite genius to have the second guy hide himself so that they're chasing a phantom, so to speak.
Right.
They're chasing someone who doesn't exist, so then you wouldn't have to worry about catching up to him, not catching up to him. Blah, blah, blah. So that was quite genius.
We will catch him up to him in an instant. Let's see.
That the whole ending scene with the Percy and his when Chauvelin is left and then Marguerite just lying there and then she hears
Him moaning.
the terribly English thing that he says, lovely thing that he says. When she hears that, it's just like, and then further on, zows, and wicks the rat, I wish that hit so hard. That is my absolute favorite part of this book. It's just the best part.
Why is that the best part? Well, I guess.
I don't know, just because it's like the culmination. It's like, all hope was lost! And then
he says that.
And then that, and
I
it's
see what
so
you're saying.
unexpected, and so you're like, wait, what? And then it's just so perfect to Percy too.
Yes, definitely. I think maybe I was, something else that could have happened. Well, it kind of couldn't have happened, but anyway, something also. If Sir Percy, let's say the Jew was actually the Jew, and he wasn't Sir Percy. Sir Percy But there was no way Sir Percy could have known necessarily that. What was I gonna say? There was no way to know that. There was no way Sir Percy could have known that they would have tied him up there at the hut, with them, or
Right.
when they were lying in wait for them at the hut. They were near the hut. But what could have happened is that Sir Percy could have come in later and then changed places with the guy tied up. So there would be no reason for him to do that.
Yeah, and also they would probably recognize that he looked different.
But
Though
he's
in
in
the
the
night
dark.
they wouldn't necessarily care. But yes, too many problems. No. But what I just realized is that remember when he was having dinner with.
Oh wait. I think maybe I was thinking he left and then came back. Maybe.
As I was saying, when he was having dinner with Chauvelin, and then I was saying, I wonder if he knew if Marguerite was up there. And we now know that he did know, but he didn't let on. So when he gave that quick glance around,
Who gave the quick glance?
Percy, when he said, "And how is your wife?" incidentally, said, Chauvelin, and then Percy just kind of muttered, "She's fine," kind of, not very. Didn't say anything, and I thought that if he had known that she was there, he could have given her some sort of little message or something, just to say, a word, a look, or something, But he probably couldn't have because he would have given her away.
Yes. So Armand is really quite capable.
Yeah, and not the headstrong.
That's what I'm saying.
Lover boy.
Well,
What they made him out to be.
yeah, headstrong, rash.
Brat.
Not necessarily brat, more rash.
Brat.
His heart often leads his head. Anyway, I'm just saying, so here he's, kind of the head guy, taking the orders.
Kind of seconding. No, he's not the head guy.
Leading the Count de Tourney to the boat and everything,
I guess. He's even he only has 2 lines or a few lines at the very beginning, and that's it.
That's true. They give him a really big part in the movie.
Yeah, they gave him Tony's part.
Compared to this. Yeah, that's true. It's kind of sad. Percy, let me go and bring her back to England.
Yeah, well, that was Suzanne. Or, no, that wasn't Suzanne. That was.
No, it wasn't.
What was her name? Out of the question. What was her name?
I don't know.
Wasn't it Suzanne?
No, it wasn't Suzanne. It was something.
What you've been dreaming of. No, not already.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, since superb.
You'll be
too
superb.
superb.
Yeah.
Too superb. Oh,
My dear Louise.
Louise. That's it. Yeah.
How could you have me wait to say all my things? Now I can't even remember what I was going to say.
I waited because they couldn't hear.
Yes, they could have.
No, they weren't. The camera was off.
It was on. The recording device was on. Oh, also, really, how ridiculous was it? Now that you think about it, how ridiculous would it have been for the Scarlet Pimpernel to be whistling or singing the Goddess of the King's song when they're trying to sneak up and be secretive about this whole thing and get the men out secretly?
Yeah, that really
So,
was a dumb
so really, and here they used it as the signal, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make them think it was Sir Percy.
Which was a genius
Yes,
move,
which was a
but-
genius. Yeah. And also that they planted the seed in the beginning as having Sir Percy sing "God Save the King" when he came in
Right.
to the inn, the terrible hole.
The Chagris.
Chagris?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we had the soup, and yeah. So really, how ridiculous was that for them to fall for that? Really,
Well,
but
that
they're
was-
all on
That
they're
they're
all
on
tense
tenterhooks,
and
yes,
stuff,
but
yeah.
also that was a undeniable. You never would have thought it would be. You couldn't mistake it for someone else.
Right, and that's the whole point too, that they used it. So it was a genius idea.
And also hilarious that the soldiers oh, they crawled away a few minutes ago, 20
Yeah, that
minutes
was
ago.
so
You told us
funny.
to what?
Yeah, you let them go. You
and
told
it-
us to wait.
And it backs up my point that telling people that you have to do this upon the pain of death is not making people very loyal to you, or inciting smartness. Whatever.
Smartness.
Smart. I can't think of a word.
You're arguing on who's got more
smarts. More, brains.
Intelligence.
Yes, thank you. Intelligence. Or just, common sense, even. You told us to wait, so we wait. It's not even thinking that you should, go chase after the men. Who is going away? Running away. Yeah, that was, and also Chauvelin was like, Mr. Hoity-Toity, you go bring me that scrap of paper, read it to me. I'm the brains here, you're the brawn.
Yeah, he really is.
He was being really mean, and I feel
He's
so
horrible.
sorry for Degas, who is his, his not his right hand man, but like his second below. He really treated him quite awfully.
He treated everyone awful, and then he's just gonna turn around and beat the Jew up just because he wants
he was,
somebody
like,
to get his
creepily
anger out on.
Evil, super villain right there. Really, really.
Oh, and didn't they just establish that? Anyway, it's awful. It's awful.
Yes. Yeah, but it's he was just mildly evil. Now he's malicious.
You mean in the movie?
In the movie, he not mildly evil. He wasn't even evil. He was just an annoyance. This smart aleck. Who's thinks, oh, look at him. He thinks he's going to capture the realm. Mrs. Light is really gonna capture him, and he's smart. He's smart. He's a bit too smart for his own good.
Okay.
But his wit's somewhat challenged. I wouldn't say it's quite a Moriarty to a Sherlock.
You're not saying who you're talking about though. He, who, what?
Chauvelin.
Say what you
Chauvelin is nearly has the wits to match Sir Percy's somewhat. They're not exactly on par, but they're very close. So it's not like Moriarty and Sherlock, but it's like I don't know, maybe like Sherlock. I don't know. I can't think of someone else, but they're at least on somewhat the same playing field.
mean. Yeah.
Not as everyone. He's not an idiot. There we go.
Well, he wasn't an idiot in the movie, but
He was something of an idiot.
not an idiot. He was still smart, but he just but they just didn't portray him as very conniving. Anyway, I tell you though, so agonizing. They just talked on and on and on about the trials of how terrible this is going to be, how terrible Percy's going to die, oh yes, he's going to die, and this awful thing is going to happen, there's no way to warn him. Oh my word! Get on with it, woman! I know, it's just what's going to happen?
Patience was about you, dearie.
I know, but
But see, the more
this
you
has
go,
been going on for chapters, though.
no, but seriously, the more you go through that, the more, if we had read it straight through, the more hyped up you get. And the more frenzied you get, because you're trying to figure out, you're right there with her, trying to figure it out, and find a way to warn him, and you're just thinking this, and you're thinking that, and all this is serving to prolongate your own suffering in the story, and it gives you, helps you to sympathize
Right.
with her. So it's ingenious.
It's hilarious
And it really-
that he has sumptuous clothes aboard his boat.
Well, that makes sense.
But it's hilarious. I mean, just, he has this exquisite,
Change of clothes.
yeah,
Change of clothes.
and well, it sounds like the amenities on the boat are quite lavish.
Yes, I would think so.
I'm just saying, it's another detail you never knew about before,
I see.
and it's a fun detail.
Fascinating.
And that's funny about he mentions the thing. Yes, Madame Suzanne would have a very methodical, wonderful husband.
Yes, and that's a good another extra happy ending of that. They got married in the end.
Yes.
It was so sweet that he carried her.
Yes, it was.
And I also liked how they didn't have him be perfectly fine at the end. Or she didn't have him be perfectly fine. He could just walk off, perfectly fine. Or just come up like he was actually hurt. And it wasn't just oh, I'm fine. It was I'm really hurt, but I'll be fine kind of thing, how do you say it? They showed weakness. So it wasn't just this,
Right.
King Arthur type of hero where everything's fine, nothing can hurt me.
Yeah, more realistic.
Should have
Yeah,
said King Arthur because I don't really know what I'm talking about at that point. It's like I can't think of a example.
Just like, yeah.
A realistic hero.
Realistic.
Oh wow. That was very good.
So we never knew whether the Prince of Wales actually was in on it or not.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it doesn't say.
So I guess Chauvelin, was obviously demoted from his. I
Oh,
wonder if he
the
was.
accredited agent was not present at that or any other social function in London after that memorable evening. So does that mean he was not?
So at the very least, he was demoted, or he never went back. And he never went back to England, never faced them anymore.
Yeah, so either he never went back, or
He was
you never
demoted,
knew what
or
happened.
he was guillotined.
It sounds more like he. It sounds more like
He
he.
didn't show his face.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't blame
Or
him.
he was not invited. See, the way it says, it is also a fact that Monsieur Chauvelin, the accredited agent of the French Republican government, was not present at that or any other social function in London after that memorable evening at Lord Grenville's ball. It almost sounds like he was kind of shut out.
Maybe.
Or he just, they never saw him again after that, so he never came back. So, that's good riddance.
He's still sitting there waiting at the boat to this day.
No. Well, it was a very good book. Very frustrating book. No, it was a very good book.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this before, I keep meaning to, but there is a retelling of the Scarlet Pimpernel, a book out there, which I can only find one, I think, from a Goodreads search, but it's called Rook. I read it 2 years ago. I read it last Sukkot. And I really liked it. It was set, it's like dystopian, so it's kind of interesting that it's set in the future, but like it's the future past, so to speak. So like they went forward in time with all this technology, and then the next thing you know, there were like so much technology that satellites started falling from the sky, killing everyone, so they like banned technology. And so now, and like they're, the underdogs are now taking over the aristocrats and killing them with a guillotine and stuff. So you have that whole aspect in it. And it's really quite funny because they like digging and then like they find a bottle cap and they're like, I wonder what Pepsi was. Was it like some grand something? And it's like really, really funny. And it's also something I wasn't too sure about was that it did kind of a gender swap, which normally I don't care for that. But
With the main character.
the main character, so instead of Percy being a boy, they had the girl, I forget what her name is, but the girl was the Scarlet Pimpernel, and she left a rook's feather dipped in red instead of the Scarlet Pimpernel flower. And she went as the Red Rook, and she would go rescue people with her brother. And she's trying to say, so at the same time, she's the Scarlet Pimpernel, she is having to get into like an arranged marriage to save her family fortune, and the whole Sir Percy being an idiotic fop is her fiance, Renee. It's not Renee, but it's spelled like Renee, but it's a boy's name. And so the fop person is of the Sir Percy character
Pop
is
aspect.
her fiance. But the fiance, I wouldn't tell you anything else. He's not all that he seems. And I really like the only thing that I thought was kind of weird was that there was the Chauvelin character was also super evil. But he did this thing where he would like flip a coin and like was like fate, was involved, but it was just like luck or whatever. It was like almost like a religion type thing, and it was kind of creepy. Which that was just me. I don't know if she meant it to be that way or not, or whatever else. So I really enjoyed it still. I'd like to reread it because it was 2 years ago. But if you guys want to continue to read another type of the same, another version of the same sort of story with a few extra twists and turns. There's that one. So it's called Rook by Sharon Cameron, I believe.
That's for extra credit.
Yeah, there you go.
Or the extra credit or additional activities.
And also, my friend Grace sent me a link to a movie, another movie version
The
of
Scarlet
Scarlet Pimpernel, which is set in the 1940s, which is like perfect because I was also thinking about it. You know, if you, she did in the Rook book, she put hers in the future, but it was like the same kind of period. And I was thinking you couldn't really do a retelling in any other time period necessarily because there isn't like the same, say, the aristocrats thing. Yeah. Where am I going with this? Oh yeah. Anyways.
yeah.
But the World War II, which is the movie was set in World War II. Did I say that?
I don't know. 1940s.
Anyway,
World
set
War
in World War II, so it's like perfect, you know, because you have the whole Holocaust and saving the Jews, and it's like absolutely perfect.
Right.
For a retelling. So it's on YouTube somewhere, and it has Leslie Howard
Again, yeah.
in it.
Who also
So
plays in the other Scarlet Pimpernel movie, the black and white one. So it's quite, yeah, quite interesting. And it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, he plays him again in another retelling. So
yeah, so we haven't watched it yet, but Grace said that it was very good, and so it's on our list.
yeah, we'll have to put a link to it in the post if we find it or something. And what else? Yeah.
We tried to think up some names for Dreamcast, and we couldn't come up with anybody for Marguerite. Did we? Right, we didn't.
I don't think we did. I think I know more guy actors than girl actors for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah. I don't know. Man, I kind
Well,
of.
we said what you call it? The guy who gives phone guy Richard Armitage for Chauvelin.
But I think there's another guy who I don't know his name, but he plays Mr. Hanley.
Henley?
Mr.
Oh
Hanley.
no, he's so creepy.
Exactly, Mr.
No,
he plays.
no, no, no.
Hush. He plays Mr. Hanley in Heartland. So if you guys want to look him up, I forget what his name is. He's like super thin and like has a very thin, gaunt face, and he looks really, really creepy. He plays a kind of creepy character in Heartland, but he looks really kind of creepy. And you know when they're saying in the book, you know, Chauvelin's thin, hawk-like face and his thin hands rubbing them together, he would be perfect as a creepy villain. I think he would be. He's too old, but
Chauvelin's
stick
supposed to
him
be
in this.
Chauvelin's not supposed to be creepy. He's supposed to be
creepy.
He's creepy. It's not that creepy. It's a different creepy. It's a different thing.
A malicious.
Yes, it's a malicious thing. Exactly. Not creepy.
But still,
Being malicious is creepy, but I'm just saying. You know what I mean?
I guess.
It's just a difference. Anyway.
So stick him in
Moving
the
along.
mix, though.
Your person for what you call it?
Oh, yes.
His name is
Matt Smith for Percy,
Yes,
which
he's
is
on.
otherwise known as Doctor Who, the 10th Doctor, I believe he is. But also, if any of you were brave enough or interested enough to watch Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, we did not. I just looked at the clips. But he played Mr. Collins in there, so there's the idiotic fop part, and oh my word, you should look up those clips because he is absolutely hilarious as Mr. Collins in
It
that.
was quite funny.
So he could totally play the idiotic fop, and you know, Doctor Who was a bit eccentric. So he could totally do Percy's idiotic fop side, but also there's several, you know, Doctor Who can be emotional at times. So he's very good at showing emotion. Which you don't really necessarily need that, but being the strong hero type, and he's tall and he's gangling, and I just think he'd be great.
Yeah, Matt Smith also played in The Crown too.
Yes, as Prince Philip.
Yeah.
Yes, that was my example for the
Serious part.
serious part.
Yeah.
Serious part. Yeah.
Serious side of Percy.
Yeah.
And then I was saying, just because I like her, what's her name? Lily James for Marguerite. That was just my
offhand suggestion.
We keep casting her.
But yes, Grace says we keep casting her as everyone. Like I said, I don't know very many girl actresses. Off the top of my head.
Wait, who else do we have
What
proposed?
about Keira Knightley? Possibly. Maybe.
Maybe.
She's might work. That's it. Anyway. So those are impossible. Anyone else? You need a sweet person. You know, sweet looking person, someone who can be really good at being sweet and, you know, just kind hearted as
Suzanne.
No, I was saying as Sir Andrew actually.
Oh,
Fuchs.
guy.
Good Andrew Jacoby. Who could be here?
Sweet, huh? Oh. Drake.
He's too young.
So? They're all young. Percy's like 24.
He is.
Yeah. Or no, he's like, maybe like 26 or 28.
Alright.
No, but they said he was
you
young.
could make him look older anyway.
Yeah, he'd be good.
What's his name though? You know it.
I do. Harry.
No.
Harry
Richardson.
Richardson, is it? Yes. Harry Richardson.
From Polak.
And Dr. Thorne.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mary from Dr. Thorne could be, Suzanne. That would work.
She's not. No. I don't know.
She's
She's
very
more
sweet.
serious
Or-
than that. She needs to be a little more jovial, lighthearted, I think.
Perhaps.
Carefree.
Yeah, we had somebody else though for for Percy we had Jonas Armstrong, perhaps, who played Robin Hood in BBC Robin Hood, which
I don't know.
Yeah,
I might recant that.
yeah I would. Yeah, but and then I thought I think I have his name right. Aldous Hodge, I think that's his name. The guy who played Hardison in Leverage. I think he'd be really good. No, it'd be kind of interesting. But he'd be really good. His character Hardison is really very funny. He's a geek and he just owns it, and he's like one of my favorite characters. He's so funny. So he could play the fop character, and then also he can be very serious. I haven't seen him in anything serious, but I know he can be. How I know that? I don't know. I'm sure he could be.
Another candidate for Sir Andrew could be the guy who played, what's his name, on Guernsey. What's his name? The main character guy.
Dawsey?
Yeah.
Sir Andrew?
Yeah.
Now that's too old. Especially if you're putting Matt Smith.
How is he any older than him?
I don't know, he looks older.
Doctor Who is not current, is it? You know,
Yeah,
he doesn't
yeah,
look
that
like
was
that
like-
anymore.
Yeah, basically.
He looked older in The Crown. Anyway. Makeup does wonders, no.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I don't know who could play Armand. He isn't not really in it. Really, the three main characters you really just need to care about is Sir Percy, Marguerite, and Chauvelin.
Yep.
They're really major key casting people.
It's true.
So, what are your thoughts on casting? Do you have any ideas for other people? And what did you think of the final 3 chapters? 4 chapters?
Which is a satisfactory ending for you.
Yeah. I wonder if the next book in the series picks up and Marguerite is in on his heists now.
Right.
To, helps
Or
him with
assist them, yeah. I dare to say it. There is one thing missing out of the ending.
What?
Should be obvious. Well, actually. No, I'm right. He never kissed her. He should have kissed her.
What? They basically had that when he's walking her and he's having
But they didn't
whispering
say
sweet
it.
nothings.
Yes, but they didn't say it. He did kiss her
They're
feet.
married. It's not like they're...
But they just went through a fiery ordeal. They were just... They should have kissed.
Well, this has all been very fun doing this read along.
Yeah.
We have to sincerely, and especially thank both movie critic and Carissa for your
Continued comments.
yes, for your continued comments. It just really just made our days and just helped us push on with the read along and just really
Inspired us.
yes,
to keep
inspired
going.
us. And
Anytime you're like, no one's listening to us, no one cares.
yes,
It looks like, they commented. They like us. They really like us.
yes. So we couldn't have done it without you both. So please know that you are very much appreciated, and round of applause for Carissa and movie critic.
Yes. And also shout out to our friend the Fräulein, who was also listening along until she lost internet. But if she continues listening along, we love you, Fräulein. Thank you. An applause for the Fräulein. Yes. So, suppose this is goodbye. For now.
So long.
Farewell. Goodbye.
Alright, well, be sure to leave us some comments this week and yes, give us your final thoughts on the read along.
Or anything.
Or anything, and let us know if you're planning on watching the movie or any of the movies.
Or what your favorite movie is. Or favorite related thing is.
Related thing?
Yeah.
You mean Scarlet Pimpernel theme?
Like, if you read any of the books, your book is, or if you read any other retellings, do tell me. What's your favorite retelling? Period. Because I'm always interested in those. And has anyone ever read a retelling of The Tale of Two Cities? I'm
Taking this opportunity to say everything.
And another thing! Yeah.
Yeah, and also let us know if you have any, well, I did say this already, but, let us know if you guys have any ideas for another read-along, if that's something you're interested in. We'll probably take a break for a while, but, perhaps maybe we could do one in the spring.
Perhaps.
So let us know, and we'll make sure we keep your suggestions in mind. Do keep in mind as you're thinking of suggestions that well, it would all depend on whether we did the read along in video form, or did it in just blogging form in writing posts like we did for Valency. What was that book called? Oh, the Blue Castle. Yeah. So, but if we do videos, we cannot do a book that would not be in free domain. So public domain. Sorry. So for videos, pick something that will be in public domain. So that would be, the classics basically.
Tale of Two Cities.
Yes, ma'am.
I know.
Don't listen to her.
Les Miserables.
Yeah, we'll never get to that. Never.
Just get to the good parts.
Yes, so there is an article online somewhere, and it's, a certain year, prior to that certain year, anything.
Well, I think it's 50 years ago, right? 50 or 100 years that it was published.
I'm not sure.
I think it's either 100 or 50 or 100 years.
It has to be 50 years old to be able to use it, do you think? Yeah, so something like that.
Yeah.
So, so
that does limit it quite a bit. So.
Yeah. Or if you'd rather just do the blog post for it, then just,
Maybe we should just go back to that, like every other one or something.
If you'd rather just do the blog post, then, you don't have to worry about public domain. We'll just, read the chapters on our own and then just, discuss on the blog. So, anyway, so thank you all so much for being a part of the read along, and we hope to still interact with you very soon on the blog. And yes, so goodbye.
Goodbye.